Here we go. Topic of this video is thinking of the phrasing. I've been doing black for a number of videos. Let's switch it up. Some color diversity. I did blue in the video before this in terms of filming, so let's do red this time. My residency history and I'm writing this one on without the board up so that it looks somewhat nice and is somewhat legible. History and status. Okay, by residency, I mean places I have lived and my resident status in the places I have lived. So you can live in a place and not be a resident of the place, or you can be a temporary resident, a part-time resident, or a full-time resident. So I'm going to go through all the places I've lived, at least on a regional. So let's get started. I was born in 1992, August 1992. So 1992 to 2012, January 2012. I was born in the city of Seattle in Washington State, Seattle proper, and my family moved to, I'm the youngest child, I'm the second child, I have one older sibling, so it was my mom, my dad, my sister, and I, and we moved to Shoreline, a place called Arden in Shoreline, the city of Shoreline, which is technically, on addresses, I can put Seattle, so in that sense it is still part of Seattle. Yeah, so technically still Seattle, so this is going to be Seattle, and in parentheses, Shoreline. Washington State. State. United States of America. And so that was 08, so August to January. So I was 19 years old when I first moved away from Seattle. And so my family moved to Shoreline, and then I started attending the University of Washington, which is located in Seattle. There's a University of Washington Bothell that's located in Bothell. So it's a different school, it's kind of a statewide system. The University of Washington system, public school system at the college level. So first 19 years, a little over 19 years of my life, I was born and raised in Seattle, Washington State, United States of America. When I was 19, January, so we will do Jan 2012 to June. Oh, and in Shoreline in Seattle for the first 19 years of my life, I was a full-time resident. I voted here, I registered to vote here, I voted here, I got my driver's license here, I got my driver's permit here, all of that, Washington State. And then in 2012, before January 2012, I had to apply for my visa. I lived in a place called Port Elizabeth. Seattle is known as the Emerald City, just as a fun, because of how green it is and its nature-centric approach to life and living and that kind of thing. At some point, if it not still, it had the most parks per square footage of any city or of a certain size in the United States of America, something like that. So the reason why Seattle is called the Emerald City is nature-centric focus. Why do I bring this up? because I lived in a place called Port Elizabeth in South Africa, and it was known as, had two names, the Windy City and the Friendly City, and it was so windy there that I could literally fall forward and the wind would hold me up. Literally, not like kind of, but full on. And when I was running, so I'm a runner, and when I ran in Africa, the wind would be so strong that I'd start off running in a straight line and it would blow me across the pavement with me leaning into the wind. So I would be like, I'd run forward, wind drag would carry me to the other side of the pavement, and I would have to zigzag back as I run to offset. So it'd be like, my runs were much longer that way because it's not running in a straight line. It's like this straight line, only I'm going choo, 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 choo. So it like doubles the distance. Plus I have drag, which wind resistance, which made the runs a whole lot harder. So that's my experience with the wind. Only place I've experienced wind like that on a consistent daily basis. So Port Elizabeth is in the province. So in South Africa, they have provinces instead of states. So it was in the province of the Eastern Cape, South Africa. The Eastern Cape was, when I lived there, was the province in South Africa that had the highest crime rates, things like murder, assault, theft, rape, that kind of stuff, had the highest within South Africa, and South Africa was the highest in the world at the time. And we felt that, like, on a day-to-day basis, there was crime that affected our daily functioning and just kind of how things went reported or did not go reported, because of a system, law enforcement system, that they didn't have the infrastructure that places like the United States of America had. So it was day-to-day living for everybody, not just one type of person. It was, though I was an international student, I was living there, I was a full-time resident on a student visa, and a lot of the times criminals would actually target white internationals, so not necessarily white people from South Africa, but white people internationally. And how did they know that? We were told not to speak by people who lived in South Africa, not to speak when we were walking on the sidewalks, because people would know that our accents weren't South African and they would attack us and take our money or do worse things. And that kind of stuff did happen when I was living there. Yeah, just the reality of it. And they would attack white internationals because they knew they had, or they didn't know actually, they thought that people had a lot of money, which was kind of interesting in the long run because a lot of us were there, the cost of living was cheaper, so we didn't actually have a lot of money, so it was just kind of like, okay, that doesn't necessarily work with us, but yeah. So it was a different living kind of situation, full-time. I loved it. I went there it was a childhood dream to live in Africa, specifically for the animals of Africa. They're a bit different. Like, one example, my last name, Leon Hardy. Leon is Roman, not Gothic, but actual Roman. It goes back a couple thousand years in origins. Means lion in Roman, Leon does. And then Hardy, it's from the German verb hardier, and it means brave and hardy. Not like hardy, but like hardy, H-A-R-D-Y in the English language. And so it's spelled Leonhardi, and it means brave and hardy lion. And so I've always liked lions. I myself am speckled, so mountain lions, their babies are speckled. So I'm more of a mountainous person, and my ancestry roots come from the mountains. And Africa doesn't have mountain lions. They have what are called African lions, and they live in plains. So they're not adapted for mountainous terrain. They live in like big grasslands and stuff like that, which are called plains. And so I was like, I was born and raised in Seattle, and we have mountain lions here, also known as pumas and cougars and stuff like that. And so I was like, it'd be fun to go see other lions in the wild, in other animals as well. It wasn't just lions. And so like I learned when I was living there that unicorns actually come from a certain type of onyx, which is an ungulate, which is a hoofed animal. And when you view this onyx from side on, their horns perfectly align, so it looks like one horn. So unicorn actually comes from Africa. And stuff like that was just so cool. And I learned a lot about the culture of different tribes in Africa and native peoples in Africa. And I got to experience a bit of that when I was there. And so I love living there. Like the true Africa, and the crime is part of Africa, but I think sometimes the crime aspect is publicized to such an extent that the beauty of Africa can be muffled, and the beauty of Africa is stunning. Yeah, so that was where I lived. So I was 19 to 19 years old. And after Africa, I went back home for a very brief time. So June 2012 to August 2012, I went back to Seattle. I'm not going to elaborate all of it again. So I moved back home to Seattle, Shoreline area, suburbia. And so that took me to almost 20 years old. I think I celebrated my 28th birthday in Hawaii. I started school, and I was a full-time resident in Seattle for those 2 months. August to June, August 2012 to June 2015, I was a full-time, and Hawaii was a bit different. I spent at most 1 week out of state per year. So I was full-time resident, as in 360 or 362 out of 365 days a year I would be in Hawaii when I lived there. And I lived in, I'm going to put region in here, Mānoa, Honolulu, Hawaii. This is not an apostrophe, it's in the Hawaiian language. This symbol right here is called an okina, and it's pronounced like a pause. And the line over the A is called a kahako. And so instead of Mānoa, it's Mānoa. And that's how they are actual letters of the Hawaiian language. And how do I know that? As I was for these almost 3 years, I was attending the University of Hawaii at Mānoa, and we were required to take a Hawaiian studies class, and my Hawaiian studies class covered the Hawaiian language and the different letters of the Hawaiian language, and so that was just part of our curriculum. I am very appreciative of that. I was fortunate enough to have native Hawaiian friends when I lived there, and people who were locals who had lived there the whole life or most of their life and grew up there and that kind of thing. So I got a lot of the culture and just the people I interacted with and kind of the places I chose to go. Some people can live there in Hawaii their whole lives and not get that experience. So I was very, very fortunate. And I was studying geology and geophysics and mathematics. And so I was a full-time resident, as I said. And as I said, and forgetting something, student status, residency. Sorry, this is kind of like obvious when I was a student, but or when I was a student here and at the next school. But residency, it was more of a deal in undergrad. So I was here for undergrad. I got my bachelor's of science degree in geology and geophysics and minor in mathematics. And I was a resident of Hawaii, meaning I lived there. I did not register to vote there, and I did not get my driver's license there. I didn't drive there. I didn't have a car there. So if I had a car there or drove there, I would have gotten a Hawaiian driver's license, but I chose not to because I didn't drive. There, as I lived there. And so I was not a resident in that sense. It was just purely living. I was not a resident in terms of college residency either. And that meant I had to, that was just like for tuition purposes for those of us where financial aid or in-state or out-of-state status mattered. I was not considered an in-state student. That's what that means. I was not a resident for tuition purposes. There we go, that's phrasing. Yeah. But I was a resident in that I lived there full time. And that was Mānoa, specifically Mānoa Valley in Honolulu, island of Oahu, in the state of Hawaii. And then after Hawaii, June to July 2015, I was all over 6 weeks, 42 days. Might have been more, including travel. Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho for geology fieldwork. So as part of my geology curriculum, I had to do in-the-field training, which is imperative to being a good geologist, because geology is founded in physical reality in this planet, and I can sit in a room, but the room is not the natural earth. So I can look at samples, but then I need to learn to put that into the natural landscape and earth context and larger context of the solar system and the universe and that kind of stuff. So that was what I was doing. A lot of making maps and looking at rocks and identifying rocks, and we did a fair amount of geophysical surveying and economic geology, so mines and stuff like that, figuring out how mines work, where ore deposits are located, how to make a safe mine, that kind of stuff. And then where the materials that are mined go to in terms of technology in society. So what metals might go to a certain technological application, or products like talc to baby powder. And so we visited like a talc mine or two, and looked for talc in the field. And then so after a bunch of geology field work, August, and between the field camp, or the field work in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, I went home for a very, very brief period to Seattle. And then August 2015 to October 2019, I lived in Berkeley, and Albany, California. And I'm just going to do USA, that stands for United States of America. And that is located Alameda County. I was classified as a resident for my driver's license, for voting, for school purposes. I was a graduate student in geophysics at the University of California, Berkeley. And yes, I did qualify for a residency. So that was awesome. Yeah. So I was a full-time resident. I didn't split my time here with anywhere else. And then I moved home on October 31st. That's when I started the move. Finished November 13th or 14th. 13th, I think. Something like that. And mid-November 2019, I finished moving home. So November 2019 to present is, again, Seattle and Shoreline. And I am in King County. Which is actually named after the King family, which is a British name in origins. Like if you go back to like the true origins. It's a fun factoid. Washington State. USA. And I have registered to vote here, voted here, have my driver's license here, am permanent resident here, full-time. I'm a resident here for tuition purposes. Yeah. So I'm back. There and back again. A Seattleite tale. I just can't get enough.